My phone rang at 1 o'clock in the morning, and the voice on the other end told me they had found my missing grandson at the truck stop off Route 11. She said his name was Oliver Bradford, age 7, brown eyes, small crescent scar above his right eyebrow, and he was safe and warm and drinking hot chocolate in the back office of the substation. I told her that could not be right. Oliver was asleep in the bedroom across the hall from mine. I could hear him breathing through the crack in the door. To understand how a stranger on a phone at that hour could describe my grandson down to the exact shape of the little scar he had gotten falling off his bicycle 2 summers ago, you would have to go back years. Back to a house full of Sunday dinners and screen door slams. Back to a woman who used to sit on the porch with a cup of chamomile tea and say that family is never a straight line and that it bends where love is needed most. My name is Thomas Bradford. I am 64 years old. I spent 37 years building cabinets and kitchen tables in a shop just off Elm Street in a town called Cedar Hollow, Ohio. Population just under 4,000. One blinking traffic light at the intersection of Main and 3rd. One diner that has been open since 1962. And one hardware store where the same man has been standing behind the counter longer than I have been married. I drive a 1998 Ford pickup with a cracked side mirror I have been meaning to fix for 6 years. I own a chocolate Labrador named Gus, who is too old now to chase squirrels anymore, but still tries every morning out of habit. Every day at 7, I sit in the same booth at Marlene's Diner on 3rd Street, the one by the window where the sun cuts in at just the right angle in October, and I eat 2 eggs over easy with a slice of dry toast and a cup of black coffee. And Marlene never once has asked me what I want because she has known for 11 years. Most folks in town know me as Tom. Nobody knows much about me beyond that, and I have always preferred it that way. My wife Helen died 6 years ago this coming November. Ovarian cancer. It took her the slow way that kind of thing does, one small piece at a time, until the last piece was a hand I was holding in a hospital room that smelled like disinfectant and old carnations somebody had brought and forgotten to throw out. Helen was smarter than me in every way that mattered. She could look at a person for 10 seconds and know things about them that would take me a year to figure out on my own. She had a saying she used whenever life got tangled, whenever something did not make sense to me, whenever I came home from the shop shaking my head about somebody who had done somebody else wrong. She would put her hand on my forearm and she would say, "Thomas, family is never a straight line. It bends where love is needed most." I did not understand it back then. I would nod the way a husband nods when his wife says something wise, and I would let the words wash over me the way you let a warm rain roll off a good jacket. I would spend the next 7 years learning that she had been trying to prepare me for something none of us could have seen coming. After Helen passed, I made coffee for one for the first time in 38 years. I set the second mug down on the counter and then put it away again because there was no reason for it to be out. I talked to the empty chair across from me for a while. I reached across the bed at night for a hand that was not there anymore, and I would find myself surprised each morning that I still could not find it. Some griefs do not soften. They just get old with you. Our only daughter, Sarah, moved back to Cedar Hollow the year after her mother died. She had been living in Columbus with her husband, Richard Whitmore, a man who worked in some kind of insurance office and wore suits that fit too tight around the shoulders. Sarah brought her little boy Oliver with her when she came home, along with a suitcase full of the kind of quiet a woman carries when a marriage has already died and she is just waiting for the paperwork to catch up. She did not tell me much about what had gone wrong. She never did like to complain. She just said Richard had changed, that Cedar Hollow felt safer than Columbus for raising a child, and that she needed her father close by for a while. I did not ask questions. I made up the guest room. I bought a small blue nightlight for Oliver that threw stars onto the ceiling. I told my daughter she could stay as long as she needed. She stayed for 18 months before the accident took her from us. She was driving home from a late shift at the county hospital where she worked as a nurse. It was raining hard that night, the kind of rain that turns the road into a black mirror. A pickup truck coming the other way crossed the center line, and there was nothing anyone could do. She was 31 years old. Oliver was 5. I remember the officer came to my door that morning standing there in his rain slicker with his hat in his hands. And I remember thinking that a man in that position learns how to make his face say the terrible thing before his mouth ever has to. I did not fall apart in front of him. I waited until he left, and then I sat on the wood floor of the hallway for a long time and did not move. Oliver came to live with me full time after that. His father, Richard, signed away custody with the kind of quickness that told me more than any argument ever could have. Richard called from time to time, always around Christmas and Oliver's birthday, always sounding like a man reading a card he had picked out 5 minutes earlier at a gas station on the drive home from work. He said he wanted to visit. He rarely did. His mother, Margaret Whitmore, was a different matter altogether. Margaret had never approved of Sarah. She had made that plain the first time I met her, standing in the wide, circular driveway of her big house on the edge of Columbus with her arms folded across her chest, looking at my truck like it had tracked mud onto her lawn just by being parked there. Margaret came from money, old money, the kind of money that gives a person the confidence to look down on people while smiling. After Sarah died, Margaret sent one card and one small check made out to Oliver, and then she went quiet. That silence felt right to me at the time. I preferred it to her voice. Raising Oliver was its own kind of learning. I had raised Sarah decades earlier, but time changes what fatherhood asks of you, and this second time around I was older and slower and more afraid of getting it wrong. I learned how to pack a lunchbox in a way that would not embarrass a 7-year-old at school. I learned the difference between a scraped knee that needed a bandage and a scraped knee that just needed a hug more than anything else. I learned that Oliver could not fall asleep unless the closet door was shut all the way, no crack, no exception. And I never once asked him why, because some fears a child needs to keep to himself until he is ready to speak them out loud. He called me Grandpa Tom for the first year. Then one afternoon he was drawing a picture at the kitchen table, a picture of the two of us and Gus standing in front of the house, and he handed it to me with jelly on his thumbs and said, "This is for you, Grandpa." And a few weeks after that, without either of us deciding it out loud, he stopped saying Grandpa. He just started saying Dad. I never corrected him. I did not have it in me to correct him. Some words settle into a house and become the truth of the place. If this story is already reaching something in you tonight, I hope you will stay with me through the rest of it, because what comes next is the part I have spent 2 years trying to make peace with. Subscribe to this channel so stories like this keep finding their way to people who need to hear them. There are more coming, and I want you here for them. The night the phone rang, Oliver had been asleep since 8:30. I had checked on him twice already, once at 10 and once just before midnight, the way I checked on him every night since Sarah died, because some part of a man who has already lost too much never really stops standing guard at the door. He was curled up under the quilt Helen had made the winter before she got sick, one foot poking out the way it always did, no matter how carefully you tucked him in. Gus the Labrador was sleeping on the braided rug at the foot of the bed. The house was quiet. The nightlight was throwing its slow stars across the ceiling in the same careful rotation it always did. I was reading a fishing magazine in bed with the lamp on low, and the phone on my nightstand started ringing. I looked at it for a long second before I picked it up. Nobody calls a man my age at 1 in the morning to give him good news. Mr. Bradford, the voice said. This is Officer Delaney with the Marion County Sheriff's Department. We have your grandson here at the substation on Route 11, Oliver Bradford, age 7. We picked him up about 40 minutes ago at a truck stop where a driver saw him wandering alone in the parking lot near the pumps. He is safe. He's a little cold and a little scared, but he is safe. My throat tightened. I sat up in bed so fast the fishing magazine slid off my lap and hit the wood floor with a soft slap. I told her there had to be some mistake. I told her Oliver was in the room across the hall from mine, that I could see the light from his star projector leaking under his door right that very minute. I told her I had checked on him not 2 hours before. There was a pause on the other end. The kind of pause that tells you the person on the other side has stopped writing on her notepad and started listening more carefully to the man on her phone. "Sir," she said, "I understand. This must be confusing. But we ran his information through our system. He gave us his full name, his address on Poplar Lane, his birthday, and the name of his dog. He described a scar above his right eye from falling off a red bicycle. He told us he lives with his grandfather. Sir, this boy knows things a stranger would not know. I was already out of bed. I was already walking down the hallway with the phone pressed against my ear so hard it hurt. I pushed open the door to Oliver's room and looked in. He was there. Same quilt. Same 1 foot out. Same slow, steady breathing. Gus lifted his head from the rug and looked at me with tired eyes and thumped his tail once against the floor. Officer, I said, and my voice came out lower than I meant it to, my grandson is asleep in his bed. I am looking at him right now. I do not know who you have at your station, but it is not Oliver. She was quiet again. Then she said, Mr. Bradford, I think you need to come down here as soon as you can, because whoever this boy is, he says his name is Oliver Bradford, and he has your grandson's face. I told her I would be there within the hour. I hung up. I stood in the doorway of Oliver's room and watched him breathe for what felt like a long time. Something inside me had gone perfectly still. Helen's voice came to me in that moment out of nowhere, as clear as if she were standing in the hallway beside me. Family is never a straight line, Thomas. It bends where love is needed most. I did not know what she meant then, and I did not know what she meant now, but the sound of her words in my head felt like a hand on my shoulder, and I was grateful for it. I did not want to leave Oliver alone in the house, and I did not want to bring him with me into whatever was waiting at that substation. I called my neighbor across the street, an old widow named Grace Whitfield, who had known Helen since they were girls together at the Baptist Church on Maple Avenue. Grace picked up on the second ring, the way people do when the phone rings at odd hours and they already know it will be somebody they love. I asked her if she could come sit with Oliver for a couple of hours. I told her I was not sure when I would be back. She did not ask questions. She just said, "Put on the coffee, Tom. I will be over in 5 minutes." I put on my jacket and my boots. I told Grace I would explain everything when I got back if I could figure out how to explain it at all. I got in the truck and drove out onto Route 11 into the dark with my hands shaking on the wheel more than they had shaken in a long time. The heater took its time warming up. I could see my own breath fogging against the windshield in soft, slow clouds. The Marion County substation was a small brick building with 2 cruisers in the gravel lot and a fluorescent sign out front that buzzed like a trapped hornet. I parked crooked. I walked in through the front door. Officer Delaney was standing behind the counter with a paper cup of coffee in her hand. And when she saw me, her face did something I have seen before on the faces of women who deliver bad news for a living. It softened first, and then it braced itself. "Mr. Bradford," she said, "thank you for coming so quickly. Please, follow me." She led me down a short hallway that smelled like cold coffee and industrial floor wax. There was a bulletin board on the wall with a poster about drunk driving and a flyer about a lost golden retriever named Buster with a phone number and tear-off strips at the bottom. She stopped outside a door with a small window in it and turned to face me. "I want to prepare you before you go in," she said. "I have been doing this job for 11 years, and I have never seen anything quite like what you are about to see. Whatever you thought you knew about your family, sir, I want you to take a breath before you walk through this door." I told her I had already lost more than most men my age, and there was not much left the world could do to surprise me. She did not answer that. She just nodded once and opened the door. The room inside was small. There was a table with 2 chairs and a paper cup of hot chocolate with steam still curling off the top. There was a woman in a soft cardigan sitting quietly against the wall, some kind of child advocate I would learn about later, though nobody introduced her right away. And there, in one of the chairs, wrapped in a wool blanket that was too big for him, was a boy. He was 7 years old. Brown hair, cut a little unevenly, the way a child's hair looks when someone has been trimming it at home with kitchen scissors. He was too thin. Not the kind of thin that comes from fast metabolism and running around outside in the summer, but the other kind, the kind that quietly tells you nobody has been paying enough attention to what he eats or how much of it. His sneakers were worn through at the toes. There was dirt under his fingernails. And his face, when he looked up at me over the rim of the paper cup, was Oliver's face. Not similar, not a resemblance. His face. I stopped in the doorway. My knees went strange under me. Officer Delaney reached out and put a hand on my elbow. Gentle, the way you steady a man who has just realized the ground under him is not where he thought it was. The boy stared at me. He did not smile. He did not speak. He just looked at me the way a child looks at a stranger he has been told about but never seen. And then, in a small voice that came out rougher than a 7-year-old's voice should sound, he said, "Are you Grandpa Tom?" Before I continue, I want to hear from you. Tell me in the comments what city you are watching from tonight. I read every single one of them, and knowing you are out there listening from wherever you are is what keeps these stories going. If you are watching from a small town like Cedar Hollow, tell me. If you are on the other side of the world, tell me that too. It matters more than you know. I sat down across from him because I did not trust my legs to keep holding me up. I said, "Yes, son, I am Tom Bradford, but I need to ask you something. I need to ask you what your name is." He looked at the child advocate lady against the wall, and she gave him a small nod, and he looked back at me and said, "My name is Nathan." But the lady on the phone at the truck stop said I should tell the police my name was Oliver Bradford, because that was the name they would find in the computer. I asked him who the lady on the phone was. He said it was his grandmother, Margaret. He said Margaret had put him in a car with a man he did not know a few hours earlier, given the man some money in a white envelope, and told the man to drive him 3 hours away and drop him off wherever he wanted. She had told Nathan that if he ever got picked up by the police, he should tell them his name was Oliver Bradford and give them the address on Poplar Lane in Cedar Hollow, because that was where his real family was, and they would come get him. She had told him that his grandfather Tom would take care of him from now on because she could not anymore. I sat there and I could not speak for a long moment. I could hear the hornet buzz of the fluorescent sign outside coming through the small window at the top of the wall. I could hear the child advocate lady breathing softly against the wall behind me. I could hear the boy in front of me sniffle once and then swallow it back the way children learn to do when they have been taught that crying does not fix anything. I asked him how old he was. He said 7, same as me, same as the boy in the picture Margaret had shown him. I asked him if he knew who Oliver was. He said Margaret had told him Oliver was his twin brother. He said he had known this his whole life. He said Margaret had a picture of Oliver in a drawer in her bedroom, and sometimes when she was in one of her sad moods, she would take it out and show it to him and say that was the boy she should have kept. I could not breathe right for a minute. I put my hands flat on the table because I needed to feel something solid under my palms. I asked him what he meant by the boy she should have kept. He did not know how to answer that. He was 7. He had only ever repeated what he had been told. Officer Delaney came around and sat down in the chair beside me. She had a folder in her hand now, thin, only a few pages, but her fingers were tight on the edges of it. She said, "Mr. Bradford, we made some calls while we were waiting for you to arrive. Hospital records from 7 years ago at a small private clinic in Franklin County show a birth to a mother listed as Sarah Bradford, father Richard Whitmore. 2 boys, delivered 9 minutes apart. The paperwork on the second child is incomplete. There is no birth certificate on file with the state. There is a signed guardianship document giving custody of the second twin to Margaret Whitmore, but the signature attributed to Sarah is different from the signatures on every other document she signed in her life, including the birth certificate of the first child. Sir, we are going to need to have a lot of things looked at very carefully in the coming week. But it appears that your daughter had twins, and one of them was taken from her before she ever left the hospital, and she may never have known. The room got very small." I heard Helen's voice again in my head, quiet and steady. "Family is never a straight line, Thomas. It bends where love is needed most." I looked at the boy across the table, Nathan. His hands were wrapped around the paper cup like the warmth of it was the only thing keeping him tethered to the room. I thought about Sarah. I thought about the 18 months she had lived under my roof after she left Columbus. I thought about how quiet she had been sometimes, standing at the kitchen window, staring out at nothing, and how I had assumed it was just the weight of a marriage ending pressing down on her. I thought about the day at the hospital 7 years earlier when Richard had come out to the waiting room and told me Sarah had delivered a healthy boy, and how his eyes had not quite met mine when he said it, and how at the time I had thought that was just the shock of new fatherhood on a man who had never been very good at feelings in the first place. There had been another baby. There had been a whole second child. And someone in that hospital hallway, someone with money and connections and the certainty that comes from being used to getting your way in this world, had made a decision that was not hers to make. I asked Nathan if he was hungry. He nodded very slightly. Officer Delaney said there was a vending machine down the hall, and the child advocate lady took him out by the hand to pick something. I watched him walk out of that little interview room, my daughter's son, in sneakers that did not fit him, and something in my chest broke open in a way I did not have language for. When they were gone from the room, I sat with Officer Delaney and asked her what happened next. She said Margaret Whitmore was going to be brought in for questioning first thing in the morning. She said the district attorney was already being briefed by phone. She said there would be an investigation, and there would be paperwork, and there would be difficult conversations with Richard, and there would be a long road ahead. But right now, tonight, she said, the boy needed somewhere safe to sleep. She said she could place him with an emergency foster family for the night, or she could release him into my temporary care while the legal process caught up if I was willing to take him. I told her he was coming home with me. There was no other answer to that question. Not tonight. Not ever. We drove back to Cedar Hollow in the dark. Nathan sat in the passenger seat, wrapped in the wool blanket from the substation, staring out the window at the pine trees rolling by in the headlights. He did not say much. He asked me one question about halfway through the drive. He asked if Oliver knew about him. I told him Oliver did not know yet, but that Oliver was going to be very happy when he found out. I told him Oliver had wanted a brother for a long time. He nodded slowly and went back to looking out the window. I saw his reflection in the glass. His breath was fogging up a small circle, just like Oliver's always did. Grace was still awake when we got home, sitting at the kitchen table with a mug of decaf and a crossword puzzle she was clearly not really doing. She looked up at Nathan when we walked in. She looked at me. She looked back at Nathan. Her mouth opened and then closed and then opened again, and she just whispered, "Oh, Lord in heaven above." I told her I would explain everything in the morning. She nodded, gathered her things, kissed the top of Nathan's head as gentle as if he were made of glass, and hugged me at the door for a long time without saying a word. That was the kind of neighbor Grace was. That was the kind of neighbor she has always been. I made Nathan a peanut butter sandwich because it was the only thing I could think of at that hour. He ate it in small, careful bites, saving the crusts for last, the way children eat when they have learned somewhere along the way not to waste anything. I set him up in the little sewing room off the kitchen with an air mattress and one of Helen's old quilts folded over him. I turned on the small brass lamp by the door and left it on because I did not know yet what he could sleep with and what he could not. I sat on the edge of the mattress and told him he was safe. He did not answer. He turned his face into the pillow and I saw his shoulders shake once, and then he was still. I stood in the hallway between his door and Oliver's door for a long time that night. 2 doors, 2 boys. One who had spent 7 years believing his grandfather did not exist because a woman with money had decided the family could not handle 2. And one who had spent 7 years growing up believing he was an only child because that same woman had walked a newborn out of a hospital in a soft yellow blanket, and none of us had known enough to ask. The morning came slow. I made coffee. I fed Gus. I sat at the kitchen table and watched the sun come up through the window over the sink, the same window my wife used to stand at humming hymns under her breath while she washed the breakfast dishes. And I understood for the first time what Helen had been trying to teach me all those years. Family is never a straight line. It bends where love is needed most. She had known, somehow, in her wise, quiet way, she had always known that our story was not finished yet. Oliver woke up first, the way he always did on Saturday mornings when there was no school to drag him out of bed. He came padding into the kitchen in his dinosaur pajamas, rubbing his eyes with both fists. I sat him down at the table with a bowl of cereal, and I told him there was someone in the house I wanted him to meet. I told him something big had happened during the night, and it was going to take a long time to explain all of it properly, but the important part was this. He had a brother. His name was Nathan. He was the same age as Oliver, 7 years old, born the same day. He had been living with grandmother Margaret his whole life without ever knowing that Oliver existed. He was here now. He had come home. Oliver stared at his cereal for a long moment. He was quiet the way his mother used to get quiet when she was thinking hard about something important. Then he looked up at me with milk on his upper lip and said, "Does he like dinosaurs?" I told him I did not know yet, but I bet he would. He nodded once, very seriously, and slid off his chair and walked down the hallway. He knocked on the sewing room door with the small, careful knocks of a boy who had already been raised to be gentle with people. And a minute later the door opened, and I heard my grandson Oliver say, "Hi, I am your brother." Margaret Whitmore was arrested at 11 o'clock that morning in the wide circular driveway of her big house outside Columbus. She did not resist. She did not deny anything. She did not even ask for her lawyer at first. When Officer Delaney asked her why she had done it, why she had taken a newborn out of a hospital and hidden him from his own family for 7 years, and why she had finally put him in a stranger's car and sent him away in the middle of the night with a paper envelope of cash, Margaret sat down heavy on the porch steps in her button-wrong cardigan and cried the specific hollowed-out crying of a person who has been carrying a secret so long that letting go of it does not feel like relief. It feels like collapse. She told the officers everything over the next several hours. Sarah and Richard's marriage had already been unraveling in the months before the twins were born. Richard had been drinking. There had been fights Sarah had never told me about because she did not want to burden her father with anything more than the mortgage on the little house she had helped me pay off. When the ultrasound revealed 2 babies instead of 1, Margaret had decided in that certain way, people with money and no humility decide things, that the family could not handle both. She had convinced Richard in a hallway outside the delivery room. She had gotten a lawyer she knew from her country club to draw up a private guardianship document on rush order. She had gone to the hospital while Sarah was still in the recovery room, still drugged, still exhausted from a long delivery, and she had gotten a signature on a piece of paper my daughter would not have been able to read straight if she had tried. Later, when Sarah asked about the second baby, Richard had told her that the second twin had not made it. He had told her a soft story about complications, about a small, quiet loss, about doctors doing everything they could and coming up short. Sarah had believed him because grief is a state that makes lies easier to swallow. She had gone home from that hospital with one son in her arms, thinking she had lost another one in the delivery room. She had never known that Nathan was alive. She had gone to her own grave 2 years ago, never knowing. I want to tell you, I handled that piece of information calmly. I did not. I stood in the sheriff's office when they told me the full story, and I said things about Margaret Whitmore that I will not repeat here in polite company. I said things about Richard that I have not fully forgiven myself for saying in front of officers who did not need to hear a man come apart at his age. But I meant every word at the time. My daughter had been robbed of a child she never even knew she had lost. My grandsons had been robbed of each other. And I had been robbed of a whole second boy who could have been climbing into my lap for bedtime stories for 7 years, and instead had been sleeping in a big cold house with a woman who had never really wanted him, only kept him out of guilt and pride. Richard came to Cedar Hollow a week later. He sat on my front porch in a suit that fit too tight around the shoulders, and he could not look me in the eye. He said he was sorry. He said he had been young and scared and weak, and his mother had made it seem like the only option in the room. He said he had convinced himself over the years that it had been the right thing, and then, once Sarah died, he had convinced himself it was too late to fix. I asked him if he had ever, in any of those 7 years, wanted to hold his second son. He did not answer. That was answer enough for me. I did not shout at him. I did not throw him off the porch, though I confess the thought crossed my mind more than once. I had been a carpenter for 37 years, And I had learned somewhere in all those years of driving nails into oak and pine that the loudest hammer strike is not always the one that sinks the nail deepest into the wood. I told him quietly that he would not be raising Nathan, that Nathan was staying with me, and that if he ever wanted to be a father to either of those boys in any real way, he was going to have to earn it slowly, one small, honest thing at a time, and that I would not be helping him do it. Then I asked him to leave my porch. The legal process took months. There were hearings. There were social workers with clipboards and kind eyes. There were long afternoons in courtrooms with lawyers I could not afford but hired anyway, because there was no version of this story where Nathan went anywhere but home with me. In the end, the judge granted me permanent legal custody of both boys. Margaret Whitmore pled guilty to several charges I will not list here. She is serving her sentence in a facility outside Columbus. Richard was not charged, though I believe he should have been. He sends birthday cards now. Neither boy has ever asked me to read one to them. The healing has been slow, the way real healing always is. Nathan flinched at raised voices for months. He hoarded food in his sewing room, small stashes of crackers and granola bars tucked under the mattress where he thought I could not see them, and I never once said a word about it. I just kept the pantry full and let him figure out on his own timeline that the food was not going anywhere ever again. He called me Mr. Bradford for the first 2 months, unable to bring himself to try any warmer word. Then one evening at dinner, watching Oliver call me Dad, the way Oliver had for over 2 years now, Nathan set down his fork very carefully and asked in a small voice if it would be all right for him to try calling me that too. I told him it would be more than all right. I told him I had been waiting for him for 7 years, whether I had known it or not. There have been small victories that meant more to me than any big house Margaret Whitmore ever lived in. The first night Nathan slept without getting up to check that the door was locked 3 times. The first morning he came into the kitchen without asking permission to have breakfast. The first time he laughed loud enough that Gus barked at him in surprise, and I had to sit down on the porch step for a second because his laugh sounded exactly like Sarah's laugh, the one I had not heard in 2 years, the one I thought I would never hear again in this life. The day the boys decided, without any prompting from me, to split a bag of gummy worms exactly evenly by counting them out one by one onto the coffee table, because, Dad, we are twins, we have to be fair about everything. Grace across the street has become their unofficial second grandmother. She teaches them how to make biscuits from scratch on Sunday afternoons, showing them how to work the butter into the flour with their fingertips until it looks like coarse sand. She calls them her boys. Helen would have loved that. And I tell Grace so, and Grace just smiles and says, Helen sent them to me too, Tom, in her own quiet way. I am 64 years old. I have been a carpenter, a husband, a father, and now I am a grandfather to 2 boys who share a face and a laugh and a way of standing with their weight all on one foot when they are thinking hard about something. I used to believe when I was young that strength was something you carried in your arms, in the muscles you built, lifting oak beams up onto sawhorses. Then I got older and I thought strength was something you carried in your patience, in the ability to keep showing up for a life that had asked more of you than you thought you had to give. Now, in the quiet of my 60s, in a house full again after being empty for too long, I understand that real strength is something else entirely. It is the ability to open the door to something you did not expect. It is the willingness to say yes to a child you did not know you had. It is the humility to admit that the shape of your family was never yours to draw in the first place, that God or life or love or grief will keep bending the line no matter how straight you try to keep it, and that all a man can really do is stand ready with his arms open when the bend finally arrives at his door. Helen used to say, family is never a straight line. It bends where love is needed most. I hear her voice on the porch these days more than I used to. I hear it when the boys are wrestling on the living room rug and knocking over Gus's water bowl. I hear it at the kitchen table when Nathan is doing his homework and asking me how to spell a word he already knows how to spell just because he likes the sound of my voice saying it back to him. I hear it at night when I stand in the hallway between 2 bedroom doors and watch 2 chests rise and fall in the dark. If this story stayed with you tonight, if it made you think about somebody in your own family who was lost and found, or somebody who deserved to be found and never was, share it with them. Send it to the person you love who needs to hear that it is never too late for a family to bend back toward love. Subscribe so you do not miss the next story, because there is always another one coming, and the people who need it most usually find it through somebody like you. Leave a comment and tell me the moment in this story that hit you the hardest, the line that made you set the phone down for a second, the memory it stirred up that you had not thought about in years. I read every single one of them. Sometimes the people who need these words the most are the ones brave enough to leave them. Nathan and Oliver are 8 now. They fight over the last piece of bacon at breakfast, and they finish each other's sentences at the dinner table, and they have started, without any prompting from me, calling themselves we in a way that catches in my throat every time I hear it. My daughter Sarah would have found them both. I know that for certain. She would have looked at me and Helen, shaken her head and said, "Of course this is how it was always going to end." It just took the rest of us a lot longer to figure out what she and her mother, in their own wiser way, would have known all along.